So, I know we have used UseState a lot. Up to this point, we know what UseState is, but we also did something to do with the context API. We saw how we can create uh, like a global variable, a global state variable, and pass it using providers to components everywhere in the app. Now we have a specific or special library called Redux, um, which is specifically designed for managing state. Okay, so it is more effective and it helps manage the global state in sort of a more predictable way by using something called a centralized store. So it will have like something we call a store, and then it will use that to manage the state, and we'll see all this in a bit. So why would you want to use Redux? I mean, we already have the other alternatives. So the reason we have like a bunch of reasons why we use Redux. Okay, first of all, it's very scalable. If you want to build like a really huge application, a really heavy application, Redux is very useful for that. Also, it prevents prop drilling. I hope you remember the problem we had on prop drilling, like passing down variables or props through unnecessary components. Okay, so it helps prevent that, and also it creates some sort of easier way to debug your code. Okay, because you can be able to track your state. You see this variable has changed the value and so on and so forth, and also it's a little bit predictable. All right, because you can create logic using it. We'll be seeing this in a minute, right? And also, your state is stored in one central place. That's actually the main or major reason why you use this. You see, for state, use state, you have to create something for this component and so on and so forth. For this, you use a centralized store, and we'll be seeing that in a minute. It's sort of like a container that holds the entire application state. All right, so yeah, think of it as like a store. Now, there are terms and terminologies that we'll be having a look at, like when working with the Redux. There are things called, okay, so we already have mentioned about the store. There is also something else called an action. So, an action ideally is sort of a description on what should be changed in a store. All right, we'll be seeing this in a minute. So you create like an action. Do you want to increment? Do you want to decrement? Do you want to add? And then these actions are used to like make a conditional logic on what is going to be changed in your global state. Okay, then we have something called a reducer. Now this is sort of like a special function, usually called a pure function, that specify how the state will change in response to the action that we have just mentioned about. So if you pass an action increment, this reducer function is going to work on that specific logic for incrementing your state, all right, and so on and so forth. And then we have some other terminology called a dispatch. Now, a dispatch is sort of think of it like a method that sends an action to the store to update the state. So the same way we have like a state variable and its function to set its state, it's the same way we have in the reducer. We have a dispatch for sending the action to change the variable. Okay, so let's create an application from ground up, install Redux, and maybe have like a basic usage just to familiarize ourselves on how it works. So I'm gonna zoom in a little bit, and then I'll move into the desktop, React, and we'll call our program today deadbeat. Let's call our program today deadbeat. So npm create, and then void at latest, and we want to call our application deadbeat like that, and then template React. So there we have our application created. We get inside deadbeat like that. We open our VS Code, and we run the we install the dependencies. So npm I. So after installing the dependencies, we are going to straightforward get to Redux, okay? And then we'll be changing the other things later on. So, oh, I also forgot to mention there is one other term we're going to have a look at, something called a selector. So selectors are usually functions that extract data from the Redux store, okay? Yeah, so we'll see all things step by step in a bit. Now, after you're done installing the dependencies, you need to install Redux, okay? So if you come here, you won't see anything to do with Redux anywhere. So you install Redux using npm, the node package manager, and then install. So you install two things, okay? You install Redux itself and sort of like a helper called React Redux. This is simply because Redux is not only built for React. You can use it in some other frameworks, some other JavaScript frameworks. So we install Redux like that, okay? Then after installing Redux, you can see like it has been installed here. We even have the versions installed and so on and so forth. So the next thing is creating a store, and we said a store is like a container that is going to have or is going to harbor all your state, okay? So we can create it in the src folder. We create a new file and we just call it store.js. So be keen on this, it's .js, all right? Then after that, we import create store, and we import it as a named function. So create store, create store. Why is it blurred out? Wow, maybe it has been depreciated, I'm not sure. So after that, let's see why it's being underlined. Interesting. Let's just move on. Maybe they depreciated it or something. I haven't used React in a minute. So let's create the initial state, okay? So like the initial sort of variable to be initialized in the thing that you want to create. So we can have like a comment like this, the initial state, and then this is how we create it. It's way different from how we create it using useState. So we create something like a variable, and then we can just call it initial state, okay? And then now we'll be using objects because Redux is used to manage like complex states. You see, for useState it's just something simple, but for Redux we can manage like complicated things that have many selections, many things, and so on and so forth. So let's create an object called count, and it's going to have an initial value of 0. Okay, so this is an object. We know that by these curly braces, and the key is count, the value is 0. So the initial state for count is 0, and later on we'll see like we can add more initial states and so on and so forth. Okay, and then after that I mentioned that we have something called the reducer function. Okay, so we create a reducer function which is going to have the logic on how to process the actions, okay? And we'll see the actions in a minute. So we create it like a switch statement. It's first of all a function, and it takes the initial state and the actions, okay? So let's create it. We can just use a typical function. So we'll be using this we'll be using the initial state, okay? okay, and an action that we're going to pass to it. So we just create a function called counter reducer, okay. So if you're creating something else, you can just call it whatever reducer. All right, so over here we pass the state as the initial state, this state, that initial state that we have created here, okay. And then we also tell it, like, if you don't pass anything here, this is what will be taken. All right, and over here you tell it to expect an action. So this is sort of like a default value for the state. If you don't pass any state, it will take this initial state. If you pass another state, it will take that state that you have passed. And then it will also need an action to be acted upon that state. All right, so we open the function over here. Let me just bring it closer. We open the function over here, and then inside we can use a switch statement to switch between the actions, okay. So you can do something like this: switch. I remember we did switch statements in JavaScript. So a switch statement takes a thing and then compares it against different other things. All right, so the format is usually like this, and after every case you can either have a return or a break or a default. So we take the action type. I can actually just complete this and just explain it. So no, this is wrong. This is supposed to be like this. It's supposed to be like this. So this switch will be taking this action. From the action, it will be extracting the type, okay. And these types we have for now we are going to create an increment and a decrement. So when the action has been passed as increment, it's just going to do use the spread operator, and then that is to leave. If you have like more than one items in this object, it's going to ignore all the other items and just focus on the one that you're going to pass to it, okay. So if you had count and cow and whatever being other values, this is going to tell it to ignore all the other states, all of them, but only modify the one that has count and give it the value of the state that we had initially, okay. So it will have like the original value of count, and then increment it with 1 when you pass this increment as the action, okay. When you pass decrement as the action, it will do the opposite. It will ignore everything in this object, but only select count, and inside count take the initial state or the state that you have passed, and then decrement it. Otherwise, if the action that has been passed is not either increment or decrement, it will just return the state that you have passed, either the default state or the state that you have passed. And that is how this reducer function works, okay. And then down here we can now pass this function to create the store. So we can create the actual store, and we do it like this. We just create a store variable, and then we use this function. I'm not sure what it was depreciated to, but we'll just use it anyways. So this is how you create the store, and you create it using the create store function, and then you pass to it this. You pass to it this function that you just created. So we're using this that we imported here, okay. And then after that, you can export this as the default store. Export. Let's even add a comment, and then we export it as the default store like that, right? Then after that, this actually is not like mandatory that you can have it as JS. You can have it as JSX. Actually, you just have it as JSX, just to avoid the confusion. All right, so we have the store created, and then now we can go to anywhere in the. If we want this store to be accessible to all the components, we can wrap this up the main application component. We can wrap it with a provider, and then have the what we call this thing, have the store inside, okay. So we can go to the main app component, and then say we want this app we want this app to be wrapped in a provider. So we wrap it in a provider like that. Okay, and you can see a provider has been imported from React Redux, and then the provider is going to take a prop, and the prop is a store, and the prop is a store, and this store we're going to get it from the store that we just created. So let's just do store like this, and then we're going to pull it from the store that we just created. I'll show you how to do that in a bit. And then inside we can now have the app, so anything that is being passed through the app will have access to this store. Now let's import the store. So we import it like this, just like a typical React component, yeah, and we are done with that. So now anything that we create inside the app component, or we use in the app component, will have access to this store. Now let's go ahead and create maybe a counter component that is basically going to increment and decrement stuff. Okay, so we can create counter a counter component .jsx, and function counter like that. And oh, we had said we're going to be using fat arrow functions from now on, so let me just do that. So we can do const counter is equal to it's a fat arrow function, and this is how we create a fat arrow function like that. All right, and then we close it like that. So ideally we're done, and then we can just export it. That is how a fat arrow function looks in the basics or in the export default counter. Like, this is simply how an empty fat arrow function will look like. It's not anonymous because it has a name, all right, the name counter, and that is what we export here. Anyways, let's give it something inside the body. So first of all, we can just return an empty div. So return an empty div for now. We can even return a fragment instead of a div, because ideally we want to be styling anything. So let's return an empty fragment. Okay, that's an empty fragment. So this is a complete component, even though it doesn't have anything. Now inside, or before we even get inside, let's use those values in the store. Okay, so we're going to create a variable. Let's create it over here. So the first variable, we can have it being the actual count. Okay, so count, and this count we're going to pull it from the store. Okay, so now this is how we access states from like our store. All right, so the first thing you do is you import two things. You import use selector and you import use dispatch. Okay, so use selector is going to be used to access the state. Okay, and then the use dispatch is going to be used to dispatch the actions. All right, I know these are new terminologies, but you're going to see what they do in a minute. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is get this count using use. I hope it's going to import it for me. Use selector like this. Yeah, and you can see like it has imported it for me, use selector from React Redux. And this use selector is the one that we use to sort of access the state from the store. All right, so in the use selector, we pass to it a fat arrow function, and this fat arrow function takes a parameter. So let me just walk you through step by step. So we will pass a fat arrow function like this. Let me just create it without parameters for me to show you like what is happening. A fat arrow function looks like this, and because it's a single line, we don't need to like have anything over here, or we can choose to have brackets like that. It doesn't matter, but because it's a single line, it's not really necessary. Now over here we pass a function parameter state. So this anonymous callback function, which is a fat arrow function, is going to take the state and then pass it to state.count. Okay, so it's going to pass it to state.count like this. So let me just walk you through what is happening in here. Redux is going to go to the store, okay, and then it's going to check, do we have any state in here? Okay, it's going to see like we have this state, this initial state over here. Okay, when it sees it, it's going to pick the value inside here. All right, and then it will bring it over here using this uselector to select that state, and then set this count to be that state that it has picked. Okay, and then now this state, this count is going to have that value that was picked from the store. That is like how this whole thing operates. Okay, then we can just add a comment over here just for future references, and maybe say access the state. Okay, or maybe that accessing the count from the Redux store. All right, then after that we now create a dispatch. Right, and the dispatch is sort of the thing to like literally dispatch the actions that we're going to be using. Okay, so this dispatch, we just created like a variable. You can just call it dispatch like that, and then we're going to use this use dispatch. So anything that you see starting with use, just know it's a hook. All right, even this use selector is a hook, by the way. All right, so this dispatch is the one that is going to be used to dispatch or distribute or send the action to the actions to the store. Okay, so let's just have here a comment like maybe maybe that hook to dispatch the actions. Now inside our fragment, we can first of all display the count. So we can display the count in maybe a paragraph or maybe a h1, it doesn't matter, h1, and then we can display the count. Oh, come on, we can display the count over here, and then because it's a JavaScript variable, we use curly braces like that, count. So this is going to just display count and the value inside here. Now let me show you how we use this dispatch. We use this dispatch hook to send the actions to the store and see how the actions get processed in the store. So in here we can create two buttons. So the first button is going to maybe implement, so when this button is clicked on, click. Okay, when it's clicked, let's walk through this step by step. When this button is clicked, I want to first of all call a fat arrow function, an anonymous one like this, and because it's a single liner, this is sufficient. Okay, I don't want it to pick anything for now, but I want when this is called, this fat arrow function is called, it's going to call another function, and that function is going to be this dispatch from this hook. Okay, this dispatch sort of functional variable. So it's going to call dispatch like that, and this dispatch takes the action to be taken to the hook. So the dispatch, we call it like a function like this, right? Then after calling it, we pass to it an object like that, and this object takes two things, a key and a value. So the key is going to be type, and I will show you where that type is used. Type, and the value is going to be the actual action that we want to pass to it. So we can pass the action increment like this. Okay, so what is going to happen, let me close this button and maybe have a plus sign, maybe say this is an add button. So what is going to happen is when you click this button, this fat arrow function is going to be called, and this fat arrow function is going to call this dispatch and pass to it type, an object with the type, and increment. Now this dispatch is going to use this use dispatch to take it to the store. Okay, and then the store is going to receive the action as an object and the state. Okay, if it doesn't receive a state, it will use the initial state. All right, so let's assume it uses the initial state, which is 0. it's going to check that action, the actions type, oh god, against what we have in the switch statement. So it will find increment and it will just add add one to count, right? So it's the same thing if we were to create another button, but for dispatch and decrement. So this is going to do sort of the opposite. Same thing, use dispatch, pass it an object with an action, and then this action is going to be taken in the store, checked against this, and then this is what is going to be picked. Now, the reason why this can manage multiple or complex states is because of this. Okay, we can even have like another dispatch, another action, and so on and so forth. So for this, we have exported the counter. We can go use it in the app. Okay, so we can just go use it in the app. Let's do a little bit cleanup here. Remove all these unnecessary things, and maybe have h maybe 1 and say maybe redux, something like that. Okay, and then in here we can just use the counter component. So counter, and this is going to be auto imported for us. Okay, cool. So now we can I wasn't even running the app npm run dev. So this runs the app, and then we can go and see if our Redux is working fine. So let's open, we actually have a new window. We open the app and nothing. Why nothing? Let's inspect and see. Use dispatch is not defined. Okay, we did not import this in the counter. So we go to counter and import use dispatch like that. So that should be okay. Yes, now we have it working. I'll ignore all the other errors. We add not working again. So why is this not working? Because reference, okay, that was the old one. Let me just refresh and see why. Add, subtract. So the add is not working. Let's see, increment. So over here we have increment instead of increment. So I bet if we have increment like that, it's definitely going to work. So yeah, you can see so it's working. The count is perfectly working with the Redux. Okay, so increment, decrement, and then we have the store. The store has everything set up. We have the counter, it's using dispatch and the count variable. We have the dispatch in action, pushing in the actions, and then everything is working perfectly fine. And that is how you use Redux. So I'll stop the class at that.